stay apart from your friends and family for 14 days is because within 2 to 14 days after exposure to a virus, you generally develop symptoms, and that's been sort of the sort of rule of thumb. Is it based on ironclad facts and figures? I think we're talking about, in general, a 2-week period of isolation is the thing to do, right?
Right. Okay. I mean, fair enough. I mean, I that's, these are just things that, I know people have, ask, and obviously I don't know. And it's unclear to me, some of these things you start to get into the specifics of it, and you start to just, one of the things that I think we've lacked in the context of this is these broad explanations from any type of, I guess, official authorities or something. So let's talk a little bit about, what you anticipate. And we should say that obviously, and we can talk a little bit about sort of the structural problems that we have as a society, which have made us particularly vulnerable to this. But when we're going forward in the summer, like what are you anticipating happening? I mean, because there's this sort of general feeling that people just sort of feel like, well, it's gone away, or something's changed, but nothing has really changed in terms of our relationship to the virus, has it?
No, it hasn't. I mean, look, what is this, week 7 or 8 of the lockdown? Everybody's tiring of this, right? Everybody is trying to think of a future without COVID-19 and trying to get back to normal. What we've seen is a set of public policies by wishful thinking. We need to restart the economy. People are suffering not just sort of from the disease itself, but the economic impact of businesses being shut down, either temporarily or permanently. The point is that, the virus hasn't changed what it's doing, from 4 weeks ago to now. It's taking advantage of communal gatherings and people being in the same place together in close personal contact, to transmit itself. And so, lots of the states that have been reopening have said it's an economic imperative that we have to do it. But many of them were seeing cases increase as they did this, when even the White House's own guidance says you want 2 weeks of decline in cases, right? You want to have testing in place and contact tracing in place, the ability to isolate infected people so that we can open responsibly. And the whole idea that we can't do this is slightly ludicrous to me. Whether it's Germany or South Korea or Singapore or Hong Kong or New Zealand, lots of these countries are doing this. They've done it well, and when they've seen a resurgence, they've swung into action doing testing, contact tracing up the wazoo, and isolating people who are lingeringly infected. And so we keep thinking, as the president says, it's just going to disappear one day. It's overnight. It's going to go poof. It's going to disappear. The point is that it's not. And what I think many people are thinking is now we're going to have this long, slow burn of people getting sick and people dying. And I have an 86-year-old mother. It's going to be elderly people and people who we're supposed to treasure, our parents and our grandparents. It's going to be kids who may be at less risk than an 85-year-old, but could get a serious complication that sends them into the cardiac care unit. So we're going to see a summer of sort of waves of infection in different places. We're going to see attempts to sort of contain these outbreaks, but there's really no infrastructure that's been established. I mean, we've had since February and March now to establish an infrastructure so we could have massive testing, massive contact tracing, isolation, economic supports beyond a $1,200 check here and a little bit more unemployment there. We just haven't done it. We sort of, this is the ostrich version of public policy, sticking your head in the ground and thinking it's going to go away. And so the summer will be fun for lots of people, and they'll think it's all fun and games, and they'll be at the beach, or they'll be in bars, and they'll be in restaurants. Many of them will go back to work. But some of those coworkers, some of those friends and family who they have a barbecue with or go over to their houses to have dinner with are going to get sick. And, in a few days, we'll pass the 100,000 mark. Let's see how close we get to 200,000 by the end of the summer.
And I mean, but is there, and I have to say, I mean, it feels to me, and I think there's at least some reporting that, the Trump administration is just basically, the less tests means the less verified cases, and the less verified cases theoretically, and I think in their minds, like, the less people will panic and the stock market won't fall. I think that's insane, but, it's not necessarily not par for the course for them. But is there a way that we can get to the other side of, when the virus basically dies out? Is there a way to avoid, isn't there like a minimum amount of deaths that are probably going to happen? Assuming we don't have a vaccine or have developed, treatments that are better, or basically what we're trying to do right now is slow the infection rate, slow the amount of time that we get to like 60% or 70%, so that we have time to figure out how to treat this better and save more lives, en road to that infection rate, I guess, or infection number.
I think it's very hard for people to comprehend that as a nation, we made a decision, whether it's by default or on purpose. We can argue about it in the history books, but we made a decision that there was going to be no policy, right? And so, the rational thing to do would be to say, you know what, we understand the incredible economic peril that this response to this virus has put on people's lives. And we're going to do what countries like Denmark and others have done in terms of supporting their corporations, their small businesses, and importantly, the workers in their society by providing, up to 80 to 90% of salary support. We could have said two months ago, we're going to scale up testing, contact tracing and isolation to a degree that made us, first in the world. We decided not to do it. And so instead, we're opening up economies. I think 49 out of 50 states are sort of opening in some way over the next few days. And we are going to see more deaths than we need to see. The question is, we made an implicit decision that, we're willing to sacrifice another 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people because we couldn't get it together to do what other countries have done around the world. I understand that, this is going to be for the long haul, right? And we have to figure out how to live our lives in the context of COVID-19. But you don't start from sort of the worst possible position and say that's the defensible one. So we're going to have to figure out how to move through this. But I think that the innovation and the leadership is going to have to come from the states, because it's not coming from the White House.
When you look at the states, are there states that stand out to you as being particularly that have done a good job since day one, that have picked up the quality of their response?
Yeah, look, California has done a remarkable job. There was an article in the Times yesterday, the day before, about the tale of two epidemics, San Francisco versus New York City. New York had a squabble between the mayor and the governor, the health department, and the head of Health and Hospitals Corporation. And so you had two or more weeks of sort of delays in getting on the ball with the virus. And probably, that sort of political mess locally led to tens of thousands of additional infections. In general, there are states, Republican and democratically led. Larry Hogan in Maryland, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, two Republicans. Lots of states in the Northeast corridor, in New England and in the Mid-Atlantic, out on the West Coast, who've really taken this seriously. That's opposed to states like Georgia and Florida, who have never taken this very seriously at all. And now there's a question in Florida if they've been massaging the data. The same in Georgia. And so there are states that have really sort of taken the lead on trying to combat COVID-19. When we talk about states, we have to be careful, because there are dedicated public health professionals, physicians, and community advocates, fighting for public health all over the country. But the decisions that get made, the buck stops really at the level of the governors. And, we've had, a large chunk of the governors in the U.S. sort of abdicate, sort of in lockstep with the president, who refused to see the sort of urgency of what's happening around him.
Are there broad principles that you think people should be, because we are, in many respects, left to our own individual devices in many respects, and more so, I think, in some states than others, because, I'm getting my constant updates from NYC COVID and New York State COVID. I don't know if that exists in a place like Florida, where they really do seem to want to just, if we don't put it in the front page of the paper, I think they think that it's just not there. But go ahead.
So there are people at the University of Florida, University of Miami, who are wonderful public health professionals, whether they're physicians or epidemiologists, biostatisticians. So there's lots of local knowledge that people can rely on. There's also sort of sound national sources for information. Stat News aggregates a lot of the health articles that are coming out in the U.S. by the sort of premier health journalists in the country. The health journalism that we're seeing in many of our national papers, like New York Times, is pretty damn good in terms of tracking what's going on. So there's guidance. I think what we have to realize is that summer's coming and we all want to be outdoors. That's a good thing, but being outdoors in a concert or in a house party or a block party or on a beach where you're cheek by jowl with people is probably not super useful. We need to enforce sort of a idea of harm reduction in our own lives and figure out how we're going to keep our friends and family safe. And if you can work from home, keep working from home. If you can't do that, make sure that your workplace has the necessary safeguards in place to keep you as safe as possible. And if it's not a safe work environment, you need to figure out how you're going to organize to make it that way. But your employer shouldn't be putting your life at risk. If you need to go into an establishment, to a bank or some other commercial venue, see what kind of sort of safety measures they have in place. The idea is to minimize your harm over the next. We're not going to see a vaccine, even though there's sort of, wild triumphalism by the White House. We're not going to see a vaccine for quite a while. I remember in 1986 or 84, Margaret Heckler, who was Reagan's Secretary of Health and Human Services, will have a vaccine in 2 years.
This is for AIDS.
40 years later.
This is for AIDS. In 84, you're saying?
Yeah, I just can't remember. It's a long time ago. We were told we'd have a vaccine for HIV in 2 years. We're being told we'll have a vaccine for COVID in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. So we're just going to have to sort of figure out how we can live with this virus and not go sort of over the deep end and sort of just think that this is summer 2019 because it's now the summer of COVID.
So in terms of broad principles, obviously social distance, you want to be in place where there's airflow or not. You don't want to be, because we don't know, right? I was, contemplated, do I want to carry around a little personal mini fan that just keeps air flowing across? But it also occurs to me that could be sucking in air, right? And if there's somebody who's asymptomatic, so what are the principles?
Wear your mask, wear your gloves. If you're indoors in a restaurant, you don't know what the airflow patterns in there. You don't know where the air ducts are and how air is moving downstream from you and upstream from you. Over your table. You don't know who's sitting at the table next to you who could be asymptomatic. So, I love going out to eat, and it's going to be something I'm going to think about really long time before I think I can do it safely. Eating outdoors, takeaway, great. Being indoors in a restaurant right now doesn't seem like it's a thing I want to do to put my family at risk.
What other things like that? So you're not going to eat indoors. I can't imagine going to a restaurant to eat. Takeout, and I wouldn't go to a movie. I wouldn't go to a concert. But if I'm in my understanding is if I'm in in a big box store and I maintain some distance, I should be okay as long as I'm wearing a mask, obviously.
And gloves.